order this workshop for the Borough of Gettysburg Borough Council for November 4th, 2024. Some opening announcements, upcoming meetings that are of note to the public. If necessary, after tonight, we may have another budget work session on Wednesday, November 6th at 7 p.m., though the hope is that that will not be necessary. I think we'll most likely conclude this process tonight. Tuesday, November 12th will be the regular monthly council business meeting where we would vote to advertise the 2025 budget. Were that to happen, were that vote to pass, Wednesday, November 20th, the draft 2025 budget would be posted for public review. The public would then have 19 days to review that before council would vote to adopt at our December 9th, Monday, December 9th meeting at 7 p.m. as well. I'm looking around the room. I don't see any members of the public here, so we will skip public comment for the night and get right on into it. Let's talk budget.
So last week, Member Berger ripped the Band-Aid off of parking rates in the borough, which led us into a very interesting discussion on parking rates, parking technology, and the such. So in a little bit, Parking Manager Rebecca Fissel is going to demonstrate for all of you and those folks at home the technology that we currently use. I equate it to essentially we are still operating in a Windows 95 world. And obviously we all know Windows 95 is no longer supported. But the technology we have can still be used to tweak some of our parking revenue rates, which would increase our parking revenue a little bit. And we'll talk about that more when we get into how this budget before you tonight is actually balanced. Three principles to keep in mind. The budget in Fund 1 that you have in front of you tonight is balanced based on a couple assumptions. One, if you remember, we had a discussion relating to the parking or the police department, that it's very unlikely that we're going to have two full-time Act 120 certified officers for at least a portion of 2025. So I backed out that salary, which helped reduce costs for 2025. The positions that are still funded in this budget are one officer and the shared hybrid employee between the parking department and the public works department. Second, this balanced budget utilizes the increased revenue generated from tweaking parking rates, which we can have a larger discussion in a little bit. And it also uses $350,000 of ARPA funds to pay for provision of government services, which will leave about $350,000 of ARPA funds to be used in 2026. So with that, I thought it might be useful to start with just a little show and tell, and Becca Fissel will show us a meter head and the Windows 95 technology that we're using to reprogram them.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Charles, I think they did say the programming part of it is Windows 10, but it's still very outdated.
I'm using it as an analogy, yes.
Yes. And I made an incorrect year when I said the 90s last year. I knew they were pretty old. These digital meters, they're called CK meters. These actually were purchased in 2004. So they're still 20 years old. Just so everyone knows, if you don't know anything about them, they all run on 9-volt batteries. So we do replace these batteries once a year. And these are all certified with state-certified stopwatches. But this one here is currently it's set at 12 hours, I believe, for $1. So 15 minutes, a quarter gives you 15 minutes. With the handheld. So these handhelds were also purchased, it looks to me around 2005. And these were actually purchased for, to issue tickets. And we were using these to issue tickets. And then in 2017, and it might have been before that, but I'm not sure. I only came on board in 15, so I know what we did after that. But in 2017, was trying to get them programmed, the meters, to the new rates, and they said that this handheld could do that. So we, instead of renting one, we sent our handheld out. They programmed the rates in it for what we asked for then and what we had currently had. So that is the last time it's been updated is 2017. So what happens is, nobody can probably see it, but it's just a little touchscreen digital display, and you just choose what you want. So I can choose, let me see if I can find the $2. $2 an hour, 3-hour max, and you have to go to every meter, hold it up. It's programming it, it's just telling me to aim it at the screen, and programming's done. So it's now set for 3-hour max on this one. And if I hit reset, it has to cycle through here. But it now gives you 8 minutes for the quarter. So we can program those with, like I said, whatever rates we have in there. We have $1, $1.50, $2 for 3 hours. We do not have a $2 an hour rate for 12 hours. The highest we have for a 12-hour meter is $1.50. And some of these, like the old mechanical meters, we purchased in '84, so we had those for about 20 years as well. So that pretty much seems like the lifespan of everything. And we only have a few spares right now on these. I've been looking through ledgers and books. This one's from 1982 that I've been searching through to find some of the information that I'm finding. So I think that's all I have for now.
Have you had any success getting them to send that legacy software?
He has not sent it yet. So I'm not sure. He has not said. When you and I spoke, I sent an email right then, and he did not respond. We have been with this company since 1956. The borough has been a customer with this company since 1956.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for that explanation. It does shed some light on it. Any questions for Becca? Okay. All right, thank you, Becca. Charles?
Okay, so if you go to your meeting folder and find on the revenue, in the revenue folder, Fund 1, Department 301, which is, I'm sorry, that's wrong one. Department 363, that deals with parking revenue. We estimate, if council adopts the policy to maximize everything we're capable of maximizing with the technology that was just demonstrated to you, we estimate that we could see about $150,000 increase in parking revenue for 2025. I do think that's a conservative number, but I'm hesitant to give it a larger number because once you tinker with parking rates, human behavior changes, and there's no way to predict that until we cycle through a year. So I think, be conservative with the number, and then by this time next year, we'll have a better feeling for what actually we can expect for 2026. Now, in the expense side to this, knowing that our technology is limited, I would suggest it's time to start putting money aside to begin planning for the next generation of parking technology in Gettysburg Borough. So on the expense side of this, you'll see an expense of, in Department
492.
Thank you, 492. In the expense side, you'll see 492,030, transfer surplus created by increased parking rates of 151, almost $152,000. Put that in the capital reserve until member Sanders and parking manager Fissel can begin to research parking options as we move forward. And the timing on this is actually apt because we're getting ready to hopefully get an award for a grant for Baltimore Street. So any new parking technology would be implemented as a redesign of Baltimore Street. So I'm just throwing that out there that I am proposing another expenditure we didn't talk about previously of about $152,000. The other piece to this is there is a millage rate increase that we should discuss, and not suggesting that, but if you think the millage rate increase is too salty, removing this line item would help reduce that millage rate increase. Just putting that out there for a discussion point later on.
All right, so we'll revisit this subject when we get into the actual millages.
Right.
Okay.
If you remember, we talked about millages, about what can be generated by 1 mill a couple weeks ago. And so 1 mill is about $1,000 for a property assessed at $1 million. The millage rate that is needed to balance this, assuming that nothing else gets tinkered with, is 0.3796 mils. And what would that mean to you and folks at home? If you have a property assessed at, say, $250,000, that would equate to an annual tax increase of $94.90, which comes out to $7.91 per month. So that's the trade-off. If this budget stands as presented tonight, we're asking everyone to pony up, if you own a property of about $250,000, just under $8 additional per month. Can talk about my pizza economics speech if we want to. Everyone can do without a pizza for a year.
Yeah, pizza's not $8 anymore, bro.
True.
So the number we've been using internally for the last 2-3 years, we asked the county about 3 years ago what the median assessed value in the borough was, and it came out to about 220 median. We haven't asked again, but it's probably gone up, probably 235-ish or something like that. Sale prices have definitely gone up in the last 3 years because of artificial inflation in the housing market. So we're probably still looking at an, median increase of about $90 a year for the median property. So we're still looking at probably about 8 to 8.25 for a household assessed at $235 per month, $8 per month. So.
Right. For other context, just throwing it out there, we often get criticism that parking should be free. Well, nothing is free. So just so the taxpayers in Gettysburg understand what parking revenue means to us, if the borough were to say parking is free, no one has to pay anything, that would require a millage increase of 3.2003 mils to offset the parking revenue expected in Department 363 in 2025. So it's a huge hit for us if we did not charge for street parking. Also, just by comparison, if the council is amenable to this, our total millage, and this includes the general fund and the fire fund, currently millage is at 4.177. we would need the .3796 increase to balance, plus the .5 mils that we have over in Fund 3, would take us to 5.0566 total millage, all combined, all in.
Just say it again, please.
5.0566, and that's on the spreadsheet that I have for you. It's called Multi-Year Budget Projections. On the screen behind me, just for reference, talking about school districts, for those two on council that are educators, understand this all too well. The presentation on the left is the Gettysburg Area School District. The recent numbers, this is part of the budget message for 2024, so this is a little old. But in 2023, Gettysburg Area School District assessed a millage of 11.2589 mils, where the borough was down at 4.177. You can see that Upper Adams, Littlestown, Conewago, Bermuda Springs, and Fairfield all have significantly higher millages than the Gettysburg Area School District. And you can also see that they almost increase exponentially year over year, where actually Gettysburg Area School District is fairly flat. I'm just pointing that out because your lowest portion of your tax burden is actually your municipal taxes, and your school district is actually your biggest part of your tax burden every year. So even if council approves this, we are still more than half lower than the Gettysburg Area School District's millage rate, considering all the services that are provided for that rate. With that, do we want to dive into the specifics of the few remaining? How do you want to handle the conversation at this point, I guess is my question.
Let's just go through them in order.
I had a quick question about the the parking rates. Which one of these denotes the parking garage rates? Is it the 12-hour meters?
No, they are, get to the 363. 210 is parking meters short-term. Those are the 3-hour meters. 211 is what you have through reservations for construction, things like that. 212 is the long-term meters. These are on-street 12-hour meters. Then you have RPP and LPP, borough lot, county lot. And then you get into the garage. 240 is garage facilities.
So are we changing anything with the garage rates?
No,
What's the hourly rate at the garage right now?
$1 or 18 for 24 hours.
Okay. So it's not something we want to, if we're raising it elsewhere.
We certainly can look at that. I think historically, we've priced the garage a little bit lower than the street parking in order to encourage people to use that structure, to reduce that congestion on the main arterial roads. Thoughts on that issue? Would anybody favor
I was
looking at
going to
those
say,
rates?
I favor keeping the garage at $1 in order to ensure that we do sort of encourage that traffic flow into the garage and free up some of the spaces that will be undoubtedly open should the garage get utilized a little bit more often. How many spaces are in the garage? I'm curious to know. You don't have to know offhand. I was just generally speaking.
There are 356. One is a motorcycle space, so there's probably about 350 altogether. And we did just raise those rates for the daily rate just last year. That would affect the visitors we did keep it at the dollar for the, the locals that is the cheaper parking.
Yeah. And there are spaces in there that we set aside for, like jury duty. There are a number of spaces set aside for electric vehicles to charge. We frequently have to shut down the roof level during inclement weather, so that can affect the inventory there as well. Does anybody have a strong feeling about looking at garage rates? Yes, no?
I just wanted to make sure that we had discussed it at least. You could, I'm not saying that I would want to do it, but you could take it to $1.25 and still be under the street parking. But, I mean, I don't have a huge,
I had a question for our borough manager. What's the occupancy rate, or Becca might know, occupancy rate on an average for the garage?
Becca, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but generally speaking, we're not more than half, utilized at half during the week, maybe 2/3 for weekends. There's, 4 or 5 times throughout the year where it is at capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there are days where it is at capacity, but that's like, when we have those perfect storms, there's a show at the Majestic and a wedding at the hotel and a festival on the street and, yeah,
Right, thank you.
just too much going on a weekend in Gettysburg.
my only other question was, we might have discussed this already, but when was the last change in the millage rate?
It's 3 years ago, so this will be the first time in 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, 2020 was a devastating year for us in every possible regard. And coming out of that into 2021, we didn't really have a sense of what ARPA money was going to be yet. There was no ARPA in 2020. That really didn't come into fruition until 2021. So we were still sort of patching the bucket at that point. But when we realized we were going to start getting this assistance to try to deal with that year of loss, we made a conscious decision at the time to try to keep the millage flat because there was just so many people for whom expenses were so uncertain still.
Yeah, sure.
So actually, coincidentally, I had that graph ready to go.
Hey, look at that.
And you didn't even prompt me to get it ready, but I have it right here. The one on the left is Gettysburg Borough's municipal taxes going back to 2014. And you can see that we have 14 and 15 flat, then it creeps up a little bit for 15, 16 remaining flat, then it goes up a little bit, goes back down, stays steady for 2 years, and then COVID hit. You can see the spike there for the 2021 year. And then we realized it wasn't quite as desperate as we thought. And so council then backed that off, and it's been level for the past 2 years.
Yep. Yeah, we tried to be very conscious of that ongoing recovery here in town. Yes, ma'am.
Years ago.
Can you speak into your mic,
Years ago, it was determined that my mic was not on. Years ago, somehow it was determined that while locals used the garage frequently, tourists were not aware that it was available. And I don't remember how they determined that, but it was an obvious fact. And a citizen stepped forward and purchased signs that are up there now indicating this way to a parking garage. And the signs, there were 2, one right there on Biglerville Road and by the hotel, back of the hotel, and the other on, I guess, Stratton Street. Is that still an issue? Do tourists not know the garage is available, or can we determine they are using it?
Well, I can tell you right now, the tourists don't know where the garage is, because they ask me all the time on the street. You can walk around on this first block of the square, any street, first block of the square, seeing people that you can clearly tell are tourists, and trying to understand the meter. And I say to them, you do realize the garage is literally right there. And they're like, there's a parking garage? Yes. And I help them find it, because I can tell that they're like, I only get this for this much, and they're going to be there for a while. And that's why you should go to the garage. But no, tourists do not know where the parking garage is.
Local-
Despite the many places that you can find signage and on websites, our own, as well as Destination Gettysburg. I put it on my own theater website, the parking garage information for parking for our theater tickets. But my tourism is about 1% of my audience base.
Local population knows where the
Locals
garage-
know,
And they still don't use it.
and they still don't use it, some of them. But tourists, it is a tough thing, I think, for this particular town. Because in other towns that I visit, when you go downtown, there are very, very, very prominent, clear signs with big Ps to find the parking garage that is typically underneath a big hotel or on top of a big hotel or next to a big hotel. Ours is, but it's hidden away. Yeah.
I have a question related to Charles's headlines, related to the police discussion last week. It says that the benefits, payroll taxes, and salary for the second police officer position has been removed, and there's a possibility that the officer could come in maybe halfway through the year. I thought we talked about 1.5 last week.
What we talked about, as I recall, was doing a special appropriation if we add the position halfway through the year.
So we can do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can reassign funds from the capital reserves.
Well, it would be the general fund reserves. Once
Sorry,
things are in
general
capital,
fund.
they're
Sorry,
in
general
capital.
fund reserves.
And that's what the commitment, we're staying with 14 on the roster.
Yep.
Correct.
So with all of that, let's get to.
Hold on 1 second.
Sure.
I just think, while we're talking about tax increases, we don't want to be increasing taxes for a job that we're not sure we can fill. That was really I think, the general thrust of the discussion. We're committed to the 14, but realistically, it's unlikely we're going to get there on January 1st, and so we're going to try for midway through the year.
This would probably be a good time for me to point this out. I mentioned this verbally just a couple minutes ago, the multi-year budget projection. So 2025, you can see the deficit at $191,546, which is now balanced based on the use of ARPA funds, the small tax increase, and the backing out of that second police officer's position for 2025. However, envisioning that it comes back and is funded in 2026, these projections are using a modest 4% increase in each department that has employees. That will spike your deficit for 2026 to a projected $322,000. And that's because we added back in $125,000 of salary that is not in the 2025 projection. Assuming that we figure out how to get through 2028 without incurring more debt, you can see we start running surpluses in 2029 and 2030. So when we talked about the structural deficit last week and the week before, that's all related to the $600 and some thousand that's required every year to amortize our debt. But that is going to sunset in 2029 if we do not incur additional debt prior to that.
Yeah, and additionally, the hope is that by the time we start putting together the 27 budget, we will have, hopefully, new tax revenues as well. That should go a long way to plugging that hole.
Yeah. So with that, we're looking at a general fund budget of $6.941 million next year, which is about 25,000 actually lower than this year. So even though there's a millage rate increase in here, just that we were able to hold the bottom line to 2024 levels is, I think, significant, especially considering our less than desirable 19.9% in health insurance premiums this year, which was also a struggle for us. So that would round out Fund 1. If anyone wants to go back and discuss any specific line items, this would be a great time to do that.
Did anybody have notes they wanted to go back and review before we move on from Fund 1? I'm not seeing any, so
Okay, so just so we understand, without any additional tweaks, there will be a motion on your November agenda to have a millage increase of 0.3796. And we'll adjust the fee resolution again to account for the parking rate increases. We're all good with that?
everybody good? Okay.
Okay. That brings us to,
Actually, hold on one moment there.
Sure.
Member Carr, you came in a little late. We had a graphic I wanted you to just be able to review real quickly before you either agree or disagree to that. There's a document in the file called millage rate impact for something. Millage rate impact for property owners. And so what that is illustrating here is that the proposed millage increase, we believe that the median assessed home value in the borough is probably around 230, 235. So we'd be looking at an average, a median increase of about $90 a year, which works out to about $8 and change a month in property tax. So that's what we would be approving if we adopt the 0.3796 increase in the millage.
Thank you. I apologize for my tardiness.
No, that's okay.
Was there also some discussion earlier in regards to the parking? I see that on the agenda.
Yeah, most of it was parking. We talked about, yeah.
And sorry to go back to it. So in a nutshell, we are going to raise as much as we can with the current horrible hardware and software that we have.
$2 where we can, $150
Right,
where we can.
wherever we
Right.
can.
And then we have a
And that gets
strategy
us-
to
yep.
start setting aside revenues from parking in order to invest in new technology in the future. And Member Sanders is working with Becca to
Right.
start researching what new equipment might look like for us.
Fantastic. So noting that amount or budgeted amount of projected hypothetical hopeful budget income on parking, that is where we have come to that millage increase, not a larger millage increase. It is an increase, but it's not.
Right. With
A huge one.
without funding the 14th police position, which we're unlikely to fill, with increasing parking revenues,
Mm-hmm.
and with
That's understood. Thank you.
funds being set aside to plan for future investments in parking, that's how we came to this millage rate.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank Alicia. And thank you, Rebecca.
And that's also no increase in the garage.
correct.
Right. And no increase in the garage, and another plug, local privileged parking. Look it up, LPP,
Yep.
locals, look it up. It's not being raised.
Okay.
Best opportunity.
Okay. So moving on from Fund 1.
Yeah, so next is Debt Services Fund. This is very straightforward. This is directly related to the general fund,
This is Fund 23.
Fund 23, correct? Essentially, the only revenue sources in here are a transfer from Fund 1, and then there's nominal interest, which can be gained roughly estimated around $12,000 in 2026. The expense side to this fund is also straightforward and is scripted. Expenses. Fund Department 471 is the principal, so we have $576,000 in principal payments out of Fund 23, and then Department 472 is the interest, so $61,000 in interest. Rounds out Fund 23.
Any questions on debt servicing? All right. Fund 30.
Fund 30 is your capital reserve. Revenue is Department 392. You can see the 151,886. That is the increment that we expect to increase our parking revenue. So this is a transfer from the general fund into capital reserve, squirreling money away for whatever the next generation of parking technology is in the borough. There are no other expenses expected in Fund 30.
All right. Any questions on Fund 30? All right. 35.
Liquid Fuels, Fund 35.
I'm sorry, back to Fund 30. You're looking at Fund 30 expense. My expense folder is empty. Am I just looking at the Fund 30 revenue versus
There are no
expenses?
expenses in
Got it.
Fund
Thank
30
you. You said that.
anticipated next year. That's
So
right.
no file because there's no, thank you.
Correct. 35, Liquid Fuels. So this is an interesting fund in that we keep collecting money from the borough's share of gas tax throughout the Commonwealth, but we're not spending a lot of money, and that's because of ARPA. We've been creating these surpluses by reimbursing salaries for the provision of government services. I'm always deliberate when I use that term because that's in the authorizing legislation, which means we have not needed to use liquid fuels money for our local road work, which is great because after the borough receives its about $171,000 from the state next year, we'll be over $800,000 in our liquid fuels fund, knocking on a door to $1 million, which is great. So the only expenses in here are things like winter maintenance, electricity bills for traffic light devices, street lighting, some bridge work, roads and alley work. Do we want to, Robbie, do you want to add anything to that on what we want to spend next year in that, or? No, okay.
Can I ask you a quick question on that one, Charles? Can we use those funds to re-synchronize these lights? Get that stuff fixed so when the preemption devices kick them, then they don't get them out of whack?
That's a Robbie question.
That's not happening now.
Yeah, they're not synced. According to what Mr. Lawver was saying there last year, the technology's outdated and they're not syncing up properly.
That's just the camera system on top of the hotel. It has nothing to do with the preemption.
Okay. But the lights are synced though. We don't need to change, we don't need to update anything like you were saying last year.
No, but you can use liquid fuels for traffic signals.
Or
Do we-
green light go grant,
Right.
which is my preferred route if we're going to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, do we have a specific thing we're banking this for?
Chad Clayball and maybe Robbie have a plan for that, but we haven't really gotten into that just yet. Robbie, do you have any thoughts on that?
It'll be for once the,
I'm sorry, could you pull the microphone over? Sorry about that.
once the capital improvement plan has been exercised, we need to start looking at liquid fuels money to do road projects. So there's going to be some future street projects that are going to need to be used for liquid fuels money.
So could we like apply this when we're creating our master plans and then the York Street corridor, the Chambersburg Street corridors, that sort of stuff?
Sure can.
Correct.
Okay. So this is, so the liquid fuels, just for everyone's benefit, this is the gas tax, and this is one of the few ways that the state is able to collect revenues from people who use, for example, the turnpike as a pass-through from Ohio to New Jersey. It's, it's wear and tear on our roads for people who may or may not reside here. So it has been for several decades a fairly reliable and in fact growing fund for the state, and it's a way for local municipalities, especially in rural areas, to subsidize some of this road work. We famously pay more to the state as a rural county than we get back in state funds. But liquid fuels helps us keep our roads drivable. It is notable, though, that as drivers pivot to more and more electric vehicles, we're going to start to see those revenues decline. So it's good that we're banking it while we can. It's possible the state legislature could adjust that model somehow for electric vehicles, but I don't believe there's anything being worked on currently that would be a solution.
And President Moon is correct. Right now, we're anticipating about $175,000 next year in liquid fuels funds. I remember a time not too long ago where that number was closer to 190. So it is creeping down a little each year.
All right. Any questions on liquid fuels? Okay. Fund 40.
Fund 40 is your revolving loan. The only revenue we have in this is the repayments of the COVID loans. Most of them will be repaid by the end of next year. And we have no expenses planned. Unless council decides to do something with the sidewalk preservation discussion we're having ongoing. But right now, there's no formal plan to utilize those funds for sidewalk repairs. We do still have the loan program related to COVID, which could be quickly pivoted to other purposes if we wanted to develop those programs. But right now, there's no expenses anticipated.
So background on this for everybody. Many years ago, money was lent to Kenny's when they wanted to build their new location, and we desperately wanted them to stay in the borough. They repaid that money in full, and that money was just sitting in an account doing nothing. And so coming out of the pandemic, we decided to extend interest-free / forgivable loans to small businesses that were struggling. Several took advantage of that and have been repaying faithfully with no interest. I think it's a really great example of how having these funds there for new and innovative programs or necessary programs in a time of great need is a value-added service. And again, as you've heard me say on many different topics, I would challenge you to find another municipality who does the things we do here.
And the repayment on those is really high, is that correct, in terms of what we're saying?
Yeah, there have been no defaults.
Which is amazing. Yep,
Yep.
good, thank you.
Any questions on Fund 40? Okay. '96.
96 is the remainder of the ARPA money. The only revenue in this will be through interest earned, so we're anticipating about $16,000 in interest earned. And the offset to that is $350,000 used next year to balance your general fund budget. And then that will leave, after interest, about $365,000 for your use in 2026, and then it's gone.
All right, any questions on Fund 96, ARPA? All right. Any thoughts, concerns, questions about everything we've reviewed here over these last several weeks? Okay. Do you want to say it?
Do we have a budget?
I think we have a budget. Does everybody think we have a budget? All right.
I was just going to, no, I think, thank you, you do, we do, thank you. I was just going to say just for even though there's sadly no one sitting in the audience, but our lovely friends at Community Media, South Central Pennsylvania. Remember them at the Giving Spree, November 7th. There was a public comment not too long ago regarding what was it? I guess it was the gentleman came, and we didn't address it at that time. The debt services. Since this is a workshop just for public record and transparency, can we address it now?
So I gave a whole presentation on that
Thank
at the
you.
last meeting.
Just
It's
making
still-
sure.
Still available to view on Community Media. But the cliff notes on that would be the structural deficit is largely driven by your debt service. That's a $600,000+ bill that the borough has to pay in debt service every year.
And it's not something that just came up at this budget workshop of 2024. We
No,
had it during
this is-
23, we had it during 22.
All the
It's
way
always
back
been
to
there.
when
We
I
weren't
started
hiding
in
anything.
2014, yeah.
Nobody was hiding anything. It was there. Great,
Yeah,
thanks.
Yeah, if you read my budget message, there's a whole chapter dedicated to debt service where we talk about the structural deficit.
Just sometimes when things get out in the community, you want to just nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so another reason we have some debt here is because in 2016, the borough made some choices to actually borrow when interest rates were probably the most favorable in the last 30 years. And so we were able to set aside some money, borrowing it extremely cheaply, which allowed us to invest in infrastructure projects that otherwise we would not have been able to do. So we were able to lock in quite a bit of money and utilize that as cheaply as possible. And so we have been paying it back over a period of time, but it was a wise choice at the time. So.
Yeah, if you don't, for those at home that might not remember that, if you remember the big construction project on Stratton Street, the entire length, that was funded through your debt service. The ground underneath Racehorse Alley Garage was funded, you heard me correct. We own at the time a $4 million asset sitting on property the borough did not own. We now own it, which was funded through that general obligation bond, and several other large infrastructure projects which were sorely needed were done through that. So it was money wisely spent, but nonetheless, it still extended your debt service through 2029.
I had a quick question. Would the liquid fuels money be able to be used on sidewalks
No.
or in the, with the failing walls?
No.
Okay.
Roads only.
Yep. And
Well, if you have a boat.
What about the corroding roads? What about the roads that are what about Chambersburg Street?
And actually, that audit is actually one of the worst audits we get every
So-
year. And not that we have bad findings, but they're difficult compliance-wise. It's strict.
Robbie?
For your question, Chad, Chambersburg Street is a state road, so we would not spend our liquid fuels money on that.
So PennDOT's going to fix it for us.
Hopefully,
Okay. You heard it
Someday.
here first.
someday.
Okay. All right, well, congratulations, everybody. Much gratitude to everybody on the staff for your work on this. Looks like we have a budget.
It's awesome.
So we don't have to come the day after election day?
No, we will not be having a meeting on Wednesday. All right. It takes us back to public comment. I still see nobody in the gallery here, so we will pass on public comment. Before we adjourn, I do just want to take a moment and remind everybody in the universe to vote tomorrow if you have not already. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Wow.
Dinner rate.